Afternoon headline sponsored by Ram Trucks. They are built to serve. Last week, Cowboys safety Malik Hooker criticized Micah Parsons' dedication to his podcast. Take a listen.
My advice would be for Micah would be, just make sure we're all right, where and being where your feet are. Because if we're at work and, the run game's terrible, but you're doing a podcast every week and the run game is terrible, then what are you really caring about? Are you caring about the crowd that, is watching your podcast? Are you caring about the success of our team and the Super Bowl that we're trying to reach?
Okay, that was from Keyshawn Johnson's podcast. Now, Micah tweeted this and then deleted it. Just wish you said this to me, but instead on some podcast. And you've got my number. And you're my locker mate. So you could have said this any day. You do realize I shoot the podcast on our off day, exclamation point. Why aren't we talking about everyone's preparations and focus leading up to the game week? I mean, I can point out a lot of things, but I'm just not. Then he deleted it. Bro, your reaction to this podcast mess?
I told you, my thoughts on the podcast well documented. I don't think Micah should have been doing it from the get-go.
True.
Because he's young and hasn't won yet. And if you look at most of the guys, the Kelsey brothers, they've won. They're veterans. Draymond Green, won, veteran. Paul George at least is a veteran. All right, even though he hasn't won. Well, Pat Bev's a veteran. Okay. I mean, I'm just saying, like, a guy that knows the way
Porter
things
Jr.,
work.
I guess he's won. Damn, you're right.
If you win or you're a veteran, fine. But Micah, and it's not even his fault. He's just young. All right, so I don't think he should have been doing the podcast from day one. That said, Micah's right. Like, Malik Hooker, did he forget he was? I think he forgot he was on the podcast.
I don't think he did.
He thought he and Keyshawn were just chilling.
I don't think
talking. I mean, Micah is absolutely right. Why didn't you just come to me and say, man, look, I don't think it's a good idea. Because I think Malik's talking for the team, too.
Maybe he is.
I don't think he's just talking for, Micah says he didn't go to him. So here's the problem. If Micah drops the podcast now.
Well, he can't. He just got promoted.
I know. He's the president now. So now is he going to be editing other podcasts or what?
I don't think
he's come on.
Doing that. He's got people that rely on it.
And if he did drop it, it looks like he's kowtowing to Malik Hooker now. The best thing for them to do is for Malik to go on the Micah's podcast.
Oh, my God.
And no, seriously. And they settle it. And then if Micah decides, you know what? I am gonna drop it because this year, man, we are.
Oh, and then this is like a final.
Then it'll look better, then you're not just kowtowing to Malik Hooker.
Let's do one more podcast and then shut it down.
Wouldn't that be a huge podcast? That'd be a huge podcast.
All right, so here's the problem, because I think so much of this is silly nonsense. I don't even think what Malik Hooker there was saying made a lot of sense, to be honest. He's like, if our run game's terrible, are you worried about that, or are you worried about your podcast audience?
So I think
like
that. But sometimes Micah airs out problems with his own team.
So maybe
so you're saying rather than he shouldn't say
I don't know, but we've seen issues.
But here's the point I'm making, and as you guys know, I often like to quote various scenes from The Wire.
Yes.
Slim Charles at one point says to Avon Barksdale, "It don't matter if it's a lie. If it's a lie, we have to fight on the lie." And what he's saying is, what is true is no longer relevant. What is relevant is what people believe and the perception, and that is the reality with which we must live. Even if I think it's nonsense that Micah's podcast is actually causing any real harm, there's now the placebo effect almost that it's perceived to. And now it's a problem.
Yeah.
Because now it actually has caused problem because in this meta world of criticism of the podcast on a different podcast has caused a problem within that locker room. It just has.
Yeah.
To where he's responding to a teammate, deleting the tweet, and now at training camp, it's got to be addressed.
Got to be on a podcast.
So I think that Micah is right now probably pretty typical for how our 20-something-year-old super famous, star athletes would always have acted, talked, sounded like, you know what I mean? Good intentions, but don't know what they don't know. But he is just out there in the public space so often. There's a lot of opportunities for him to piss off teammates or other people, and it seems, unfortunately, like that's what's happened here.
Could just become like a
So
food podcast.
you agree with me? He should drop it.
Yes.
I really hate to say you were right, Brew, but on this
got it.
one,
Say it.
One final.
You might have been
final
right.
pot. LeBron next.
you might have been right.
You don't need all that. You're not passing legislation. We traded a lot to pair Paul and Kawhi, and in exchange, we had 5 seasons of contention.
Did you?
Gee whiz. Even though we fell
Four.
short of our ultimate objective, we appreciate the chances we had with Paul. They also went on to say they were excited about the opportunities they were afforded, including greater flexibility under the new CBA, which fans lost their minds about. They loved it. Brew, how will you remember your Clippers?
First of all, I'm doing this segment under protest.
Okay.
Why?
Because I picked them like 1 year.
No, you
And
picked
they're
them
my
literally.
Clippers?
You picked them literally this year to make the conference finals.
I think
you
you did.
literally picked. Them
Is that
this
the
year.
championship?
Well, it's
It's
a lot
the
further than they
championship.
got.
It's the
you
championship.
Just every year you picked
They've
them
been to the
more
conference
than-
finals. Here's the deal. I will remember Brew's Clippers like I'll remember Brew's Nets.
Don't you?
Failure? No, I really believe that. Failure.
I have the graphic for
But failure because of, and I'm not guaranteeing they would have won a championship, but failure because of injuries.
How
With
did
the
they
Nets,
look when they were fully healthy?
they only had 1 year
How'd
of
it
that.
go? What
and
happened?
they failed. But that's 1 year. If I were to take essentially every player in the history of the game and say, how'd he look that 1 year? A lot of guys, Luka failed this year. Doesn't mean they're going to keep failing.
Luka's failure this year would have been the apex of the Clippers franchise history.
It's still a failure.
It's not- okay.
All right, in general, he didn't get it done in the championship series. I can point to a lot of guys that didn't do that. LeBron after Dallas, how'd he look? Well,
Yeah, but
we
if
saw
that-
after that.
Okay,
So
go
I'm just saying, you can't say they failed 2020 in the bubble.
yes.
That was the one chance they had.
Mm-hmm.
They're up 3-1 over Denver, and they choke. And not only did Paul George, who I talked about last segment, 4 points, 4 for 16. Kawhi, 6 for 22. I think he had 14 points.
And every game,
in
they
game
blew
7.
a huge lead. And
They choked.
Yeah.
But Kawhi is a championship guy, has championship medal.
Yeah.
So he had a bad game.
Yeah.
But my point is, after that, Kawhi, the year they went to the conference finals, he missed the last 8 playoff games. All right, this past 2 years, he's played 4 out of 11 playoff games.
Okay.
And so I'm saying, you're going to sit here and act like injuries were not a huge,
I'm not gonna
the
sit-
defining factor of their run.
I'm just going
like
to,
with Brooklyn.
I'm going to go, I'm a facts guy, Brew. You know that.
Yeah.
I just gave
And
a
the
litany
facts
of
are, the facts are, it will go down as one of the single worst trades in the history of the league. Now, we can say for that injuries ruined it, we can give whatever qualifiers, but we can show you what the trade was. For 5 years of Paul George, what you gave up was Shea, Jalen Williams, couple rotation guys, 2 more first-round picks down the road, and a swap next year as well. So all of that for what? Well, what did you
It's
achieve
like the Nets.
in the 5 years? Right, that's on the Nets at least had the excuse of our Russian oligarch owner a year in was like, screw this, I'm out.
But
And
quickly on that, wouldn't
yeah.
you say the Nets was worse? Because you were
Yeah.
getting an old
So
team.
that's why I said one of.
I'm
and
not mad at
the.
them for going for
Now
it.
the Nets didn't have nearly as embarrassing marketing campaign, billboards, and New Balance commercials, but still, here is what they accomplished, where it stacks up to the rest of the league. Playoff games won 10th. It's a 30-team league. Series won 3. It tied for 9th. So they are like the Andre. They have a success level of like the Andre Kirilenko Jazz.
Oh.
Like, hey, remember them? They had a cool moment.
I'd
They
say
made
it was
one
wasn't
conference
that the
finals.
Darren Williams
Yeah,
guys?
AK-47s and more. Okay, so the Al Horford Hawks. Like, they're not quite to the level
why?
of the what.
Why was it?
Brew, I think
I'm
it's
just
more
asking.
than just injury, but that's fine.
Really?
But what I know is that they look up in NBA lore to the DeMar DeRozan, Kyle Lowry Raptors, which for a team with as much hype as they had is
They
a
were
little
better than
embarrassing.
Look,
It's a little
I don't-
embarrassing.
I'm not mad at them for going for it. The guys got hurt.
Yeah.
They're on 6 finals appearances, 4 titles, 720
Six
games
most.
together, and 6 most wins by a trio all time. Gee, 718 winning percentage. Are you viewing this as the official end of the Warriors?
It's certainly the end of an era. Because their championships even with Kevin Durant there, because he was there obviously for just the 2, it's about Steph, Clay, and Draymond. Steph and Clay, best backcourt ever. Mark Jackson said it, best shooting backcourt ever early in their career, and they became the best backcourt ever. So in that regard, it's the end of an era. Look, I